press the button. It's been a while. So welcome to my session. I'm functional and so can you, hopefully. For those of you who don't know me, I see a lot of familiar faces. I'm JD. You can find me on Slack as Dorf. JD does dev on Twitter. On D.O, I'm Dorficus because Dorf was taken. And I also work at EPAM. So before I got into this, I've been a PHP Drupal developer for a few years. I've been doing HTML since the 90s. I had the best sound clip site of my school. Before I got into all this, I was a paramedic for about a decade. And then more recently, I've become a member of the community health team and the conflict resolution team of the CWG. So I'm provisional. In other words, if you got a problem, I'll talk to Donna because she's got more seniority than me, and she'll solve it. In addition, I consider myself knowledgeable about the mentally ill because I myself am the mentally ill. And if you have mental illness, gotta say, you're not alone, something that I like to repeat a lot. I also need to repeat my disclaimer. I'm not a medical professional, and I'm not providing medical advice. Please don't show me your rashes or anything like that. I'm just a guy standing in a room looking at some great folks and talking with them. So why are we here? Anybody going into crisis mode right now? Existential worries? Yeah, it's a loaded question. I'm not asking about the meaning of life or our place in the grand scheme of the universe. Do that on your own time. Carl Sagan has a really great video about it, Pale Blue Dot. I'm here to talk with you about us. That means I'm not here to lecture you, even though I'm the one standing in front of you and I have the computer and the projector. But I'm not here to say how great I am or how wonderful things are for me because I'm barely managing, but I am here to have a conversation. So this is open if anybody wants to say anything, any questions, please bring them up. Just because I have the slideshow and the clicker doesn't mean that I'm the most important person in the room. It also doesn't mean that Donna is, because she definitely isn't. You said you were going to heckle me before you even got in, so I'm just getting it all out while I can. Maybe that conversation is going to happen while I'm up here looking down at all of you from my ivory tower, or maybe it'll happen after the talk, maybe later at karaoke. But most importantly, if one person in this room realizes or helps someone else realize that they're not alone, I call it a win. And I forgot to click through all these, so go ahead and read. Before we get into being able to function, I'm going to take a few moments to talk about the diagnoses I've collected so far. I used to say brag about it, but that might not be the right word. So I've got depression, or major depressive disorder. It's a common and serious mood disorder, and those who suffer from depression experience persistent feelings of sadness, hopelessness, lose interest in activities they once enjoyed, take showers, wonder why they exist. I didn't come up with that, but it really resonated. ADHD, which is characterized by a persistent pattern of inattention or hyperactivity, impulsivity that interferes with functioning or development. Other words, work that should have my full attention? No. Literally anything else can pull me away. PTSD, mental health condition that's triggered by a terrifying event, either experiencing it or witnessing it. And the symptoms include flashbacks, nightmares, anxiety, as well as uncontrollable thoughts about the event. So, the psychologist gave me a really good analogy for this. We all have touched the computer, right? I'm assuming so, otherwise you're in the wrong place. And he likened your short-term memory to the RAM in a computer, and your long-term to the hard drive or the SSD, whatever technology you're looking at. But when somebody has PTSD, the event lives in the RAM. It's really quickly accessible. The CPU can just pull it right back anytime, and it lives in your short-term memory. So anything, sight, sound, smell, anything can make you relive that event over and over again because it hasn't fully moved over to the hard drive where it gets buried under some hidden folders that you want to pretend you don't have. I don't have a funny meme for that, so we'll just continue on. Anxiety, I've got that too. It's characterized by feelings of tension, worried thoughts, and physical changes like increased blood pressure. People with anxiety usually have recurring intrusive thoughts or concerns. Everybody know what intrusive thoughts are? Things that you know you shouldn't be thinking, but you think even though you know you shouldn't be thinking them. It happens. It's not. But people with anxiety, it happens a lot. People with anxiety avoid certain situations out of worry. They also have physical symptoms such as sweating, trembling, dizziness, rapid heartbeat. And it could look like a lot of different things. I mean, irritability, obsessive behaviors, overscheduling or overworking or overindulgence, dizziness, numbness, that can come from a panic attack if you're breathing really fast. For one, again, the physiological reason is because you're breathing off all the CO2, so your body isn't really compensating as well as it could. Sleepiness or insomnia, one or the other, or both, who knows. Lack of concentration and avoidance. Now, I mentioned I have ADHD, but also look at some of the things on here. Lack of concentration, avoidance. There's a lot of overlap. It's like a giant Venn diagram where there's barely any slices on the outside of overlap between various mental health issues. So big question, what the hell am I doing talking about being functional up here after going through everything I just told you about how messed up I am? Well, it's hard to put into words what I mean by functional. I don't mean the standard functional member of society definition because, well, society kind of sucks. But it's probably easier to explain why I wasn't functional or why I didn't see myself as being able to be. Work. Work was extremely difficult. I dreaded every day because I didn't think I deserved a job. There were thousands of people out there better than me, so I must have been a mistake. And they're gonna figure it out and fire me at any time. And anybody know what that's called? Yeah, I had big time imposter syndrome. Sorry, I have big time imposter syndrome. I was extremely frightened of everything. Going back to work, would I be fired for something that I forgot to do? My old boss, Mike Miles over there, was he going to yell at me for?
I would never.
Would he give me a stern talking to and tell me to pack up my shit? No, he would never. He would. I've seen it. Is the space between the bed and the wall big enough for me to fall into, get trapped, and die? I was frightened a lot, and because I was frightened, my fight or flight instinct took hold, and that comes from the little part of your brain that's still left over from being ancestors of lizards millions and millions of years ago that controls your basic instincts. And if I couldn't fight, I'd want to fight and become angry and just lash out. I had an extremely hard time focusing on anything that mattered. I could spend hours trying to beat Super Mario World and get all the stars without so much as a bathroom break. Never had to get up. But 15 minutes of coding could be too much, and I'd find my way down some Twitter or Reddit rabbit hole. And personal relationships, I had no idea how to have them. I have no idea how to have them, sure. I had a couple close friends, but nobody that really let in to be part of my life. Most people that I knew were acquaintances more than anything. So what changed? Why do I consider myself functional and better than the me of 2 years ago, 3, 10, I don't know. Me of before. Well, I can usually hold a job. As far as I know, I haven't been fired yet. My anxiety and anger is in check most of the time. I still get angry. I still freak out. I'm not afraid of everything anymore, mostly just bats. They're rats with wings. And I don't get nearly as angry as I used to, more grumpy than angry, unless somebody uses the word literally when they don't literally mean literally. In that case, I want to throw shit. Most days I can focus and get things done that need to be done, assuming the distractions are kept to a minimum, and I mean putting that on myself, not that everybody in the world needs to stop distracting me and I should live in a cone of silence. I have to control my own distractions and focus on what needs to be focused on. I can communicate more gooder. I have some personal relationships, I think. And I'll break down things a little bit more in detail. So how did I get to, again, the me of barely hanging on to the me of hanging on a little bit stronger? Step one, you hear this everywhere. Realize there's a problem. Admit there's a problem. I lived the majority of my life in denial. I don't want to go into detail, but my childhood was not great, so I didn't really have a basis for comparison of what normal should be or what functional should be. Honestly, it took a panic attack and a health scare. The panic attack prevented me from going into a college class. Like, no tests that day, nothing specific that I should be worried about. I just sat in my car, had the same response that I should have when a bear was chasing me, just thinking about walking into those doors. I realized that there was something that needed to change. It wasn't just enough for me to say, hey, something isn't right, let's just keep on keeping on. I started making doctor's appointments. I started therapy, eventually started medication, and they all helped out a lot. Really, a lot. Like, within a couple months, I noticed a huge change. A podcast I listened to a lot, last podcast on the left, isn't necessarily related to this topic, but one of the hosts says this over and over. Mental illness is not your fault, but it is your responsibility. I had to take responsibility for my own mental health, which I wasn't doing for the majority of my life. If you have mental illness, you're not to blame for it, but if you deny it and whatever treatment you may need, then yeah, that is your fault. And finally, steps 3 through infinity. Handle the challenges as best you can. I hope you didn't think it was going to be easy, 12-step, 7-step, 3-step program. There's no simple process. It's taken a lot of work, a lot of failure, a lot of drugs, medication, and therapy to get me where I am. But here's some suggestions that may help you. They definitely help me out. And disclaimer number 2, suggestions that work for me, but that doesn't mean they're right for you. I'm not telling you how to live your life. We're all on our own journey. What helped me may not help other people figure out what works the best for you. Therapy. I think everybody should go to therapy at least once, at some point in their life. Granted, it's you paying somebody to listen to your problems, something that maybe a good friend would do, but they're also trained to talk to you about your problems and help you get through them, something that a good friend may not be able to do. Especially if that good friend says, just have another beer, it'll all go away. The real value comes from the questions a good therapist asks and how they help you deal with those problems. I'm grateful for going to therapy. It has helped out a lot. I'm a big fan of better living through chemistry. I take meds for my illnesses, just like somebody with diabetes, heart problems, breathing problems. They need to take medications for theirs. It took a while for me to find the right combo, but I'm on something that works. If you do try medication with consent of a doctor, give it time to work. I'm not going to do a poll or anything, but for me and a lot of people I've talked to, the first 3 or 4 weeks on an antidepressant or similar can fuck you up. It's not great, but you go from this huge up and down to leveling out a little bit better. So it took some time, but after that waiting period, I straightened out. So it's not just about me as a person, it's what I did as an employee to kind of get through things. It really helped me to break down tasks. Question for you, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. As a vegan, I do not condone the eating of elephants for comedic purposes. So trying to figure out the smaller parts that can be accomplished on their own. This is also functional instead of procedural. Yes, PHP pun in there. Most of all, don't get overwhelmed by the big picture. It's easy to get distracted, freak out like I do all the time. But once I reel in my lizard brain, I realize I can break things down and things go a lot smoother. I spend a lot less time crying on the floor. So I'm going to assume people use Drupal in here, so I just have an example of how we could break down a task. If you're not a programmer, that's fine. Join in on this. This is just a little exercise to make sure that you're not falling asleep. So imagine that you're tasked with creating a custom module that involved allowing a user to paste HTML generated by an external source into a text field. And then you had to parse that HTML, insert the data into various fields of content type. Big ask, right? Mike, you were actually with me when I wrote this module, so keep your mouth shut. But what are some things that we can do to break this down into smaller tasks?
Create the scaffolding of the module.
Scaffolding, yeah. Just the info.yaml file on the module file. Maybe figure out what fields we're going to need. Take a look at the layout of the schema or the HTML that's going to be coming in. Name the module. There's a lot of things that we can break down into. And one thing that helps break things down is to make lists. Planning your day might be easier if you start off by making a list of what needs to be accomplished. And if there's stuff you don't get to, then move it to the next day. Communicate more gooder. This is hard, especially living in a remote world like most of us have. It's easy to assume the worst on text-based communication because you're not hearing a person's voice, you're hearing the voice that you're assigning to the person. So getting a message from a boss saying, hey, we need to talk, might be sent as, hey, we need to talk, let's catch up. But your brain may say, oh, we need to talk. You done messed up now. Try not to assume the worst. So ask for face and voice time. This can really help out a lot. How many of you use Slack or Teams or something similar for work? Everybody, yeah. It's how easy is it to set up a quick call with somebody? In Slack, you click the huddle switch and you got a call going. Teams is a little bit more difficult because it's Microsoft and it has to be. But honestly, it takes 5 minutes of talking to somebody can save hours, days, weeks of headaches and fear. And it's not a sign of weakness to ask for a clarification. Just saying, yeah, I understand everything. No, that doesn't work out. Clients and non-tech people may not know how to put things into tech words, and I don't know about all of you, but sometimes I have a hard time translating from client ask to what actually needs to happen. Like when somebody says, well, I just need more HTML5 coolness in it. How do you get to where that's supposed to be? And that's an actual quote from a former manager who's not in this room. just to be clear. But also, take some responsibility for yourself and make sure you're not using a hostile tone either, especially with text-based communication, especially on like Jira or tickets and things like that. You don't want to come across as saying, you know, there's a big difference between your code is bad and you should feel bad, or hey, there's some issues here, let's work through them, let's see what we can do to make it better. This is another thing that really, really helped me. Don't be afraid to set yourself away. And I don't mean just walk away from your computer and not do anything for a few days. Although if you want to, I'm not going to judge. Just don't blame me when you don't get a paycheck. But I have dedicated focus time during the workday that I set my calendar. Don't bother me. I know, I'm going to have a stand-up in the morning. I know my weekly meetings, when those are going to be. But I also know that if I don't set time apart and mark myself as busy and do not disturb, then there's a good chance that somebody will just throw a meeting on my calendar and expect me to break up what I'm doing. try to keep it somewhat flexible, so if somebody says, hey, there's something I really need your help with, I'm not gonna say, nope, focus time, leave me alone, but people understand, you know, if I put heads down time, that I'm on heads down time. So I turn off notifications, I close unnecessary tabs. I'm not gonna show you my other Chrome window right now. Lock the door if you live with people. Turn off your phone, notifications, maybe not off your phone, but put on some music. Something interesting that I heard is video game music helps with focusing, because the composers of the video game soundtracks want you to be able to play for extended periods of time, for hours and hours. So the music is designed to keep you without boring you. It helps me a lot. There are some really good video game soundtracks out there. Just as hard as focusing at work, taking me time. If you need time, take time. If you have PTO, use it, it's yours. Take a day off. Mental health days are just as important as taking a time off when you have a cold or a broken leg. It's still your health. Right? And it's really okay to shut off for a day. Again, this is definitely do as I say, not as I do. If I spend a day doing nothing, I feel like I've wasted an entire day. But it's okay if I don't do anything. I keep repeating to myself, hoping someday I believe it. Now, with everything is said, this is just a guide. This is stuff that worked for me. This isn't a definitive list of things that are going to make you better at everything. They just help me and help me in my day-to-day. I hope maybe they'll help somebody in this room. If not, meh. At least I met all of you. But I want to be clear, I still have very, 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 very rough days. But thanks to my treatments, medication, therapy, and coping mechanisms I've learned, they're much less frequent and much more manageable. But they do happen. Still times when I get overwhelmed and the imposter syndrome takes over and I get to a point where maybe I forget my own name. Sometimes I can get through it, sometimes I'll just leave a message with an idea in Slack to somebody and not ever send it because I think that it's going to be rejected. Now for people with mental illness, about 1 in 4 adults, age 18 and older, suffer from a diagnosable mental disorder in a given year. Now I gave a talk similar to this back in 2019 and before. That number was around 20%, so 1 in 5. So it's gone up. I can't imagine why, but the number's gone up. So, I mean, 1 in 4, that's a big percentage of people. Those of us with mental illness are not alone. So, let's wrap it up. Before you can start to become functional, you need to recognize that there's a problem. It took me a long time, but I'm glad I have. If you have mental illness, then you're definitely not alone. And what works for me may not work for others. I'm not here to prescribe a treatment plan for anybody. I'm just telling you how great I am. And it didn't happen overnight. I still work on it daily, hourly, by the minute. What time is it? Still very, very bad days, but overall life has been better since I started taking care of myself. And it's okay to take time when you need time. Seriously. Biggest thing, take time when you need time. You're not going to do anybody any good if you're completely burnt out. Most of all of you in here right now, you all have my respect just for coming and putting up with me for the half hour that I've been talking so far. And I want to thank you for coming to this talk and sharing your time with me. So you can open up for questions that I may or may not be able to answer, or if anybody wants to have a conversation afterwards, I should be around. Yeah.
I have a question. I don't know if you're not willing to answer it, that's fine, but I wondered, do you mind sharing how you navigate either telling a boss and or coworkers about your struggles, and when do you do the timing and how do you decide? If you don't want to answer that.
So for me, I want to put myself in kind of a unique position because right now if you Google my name, you're either going to get some weird priest that I've never met and I'm not related to, or you'll get links to some of the talks I've given, which will flat out say, hey, this guy talks about having mental health issues. So I haven't had to have that conversation in a very long time. However, according to the ADA, American Disabilities Act, you don't have to disclose a specific disability to a boss. All you have to say is I have a disability, and they're required to make reasonable accommodations. And keep that keyword in there, reasonable. If I go and say I have a disability, I can only work 2 hours a week, that's not reasonable. They're gonna tell me to get out. But they legally cannot ask you, what's your disability? They can't ask you, okay, what kind of accommodations do you need? But, I mean, it doesn't matter what it is. You don't have to say if you're not comfortable with it. Hope that helped, maybe? Yeah.
So how do you know what accommodations to ask for? Is that something you can work through with the doctor, or are
Potentially,
there
yeah.
other resources out there to know?
There are some resources, I'm sure. Psychology Today, which last I checked is on, runs on Drupal, aside from the Find a Therapist functionality. But I'm sure there are some resources there, and things if you understand like what helps you to work, like the focus time. That's a reasonable accommodation. Saying please don't schedule me meeting after meeting after meeting. Asking for a 43-inch 4K monitor, maybe not a reasonable accommodation, but I mean, definitely something you can talk with your doctor about, see what might help you.
I think an example you gave of an accommodation that I've attempted to use at work is like, I'm sorry, I have ADHD, so sometimes it's like multiple trains are leaving at the same time and like never know the destination, so let me just start all over again. But I really appreciate everything you're saying. I think it's super important, especially in like a tech space, to talk about this, because a lot of people have mental illnesses and just don't feel comfortable talking about them, even in 2022. And the one example you gave about like don't assume the worst is if your manager says like let's have a conversation. I feel that people with mental illness and a lot of times have to take on the onus of explaining themselves or explaining what they need, and it's not always fair that you have to adjust your behavior to accommodate other people's inability to recognize what you have going on. So like even just as a manager, having a very clear agenda or like set subject when you reach out to the people you're meeting with, saying, hey, can we meet and talk about XYZ at this time, so that there's no guesswork that you have to sit there and do the mental gymnastics of like I'm getting fired in 5 minutes, you know?
Like
So
getting a
it's not-
message at 3:45 on a Friday afternoon,
Right.
but by email saying let's have a call Monday at 9.
And so I've explained to my coworkers at those two things. I've said, one, I have ADHD, two, I have severe anxiety and depression. So please, when you're putting a meeting on my calendar, make sure there's an agenda or a subject. Even if it's I want to see your cats today, perfect. We'll set 5 minutes to see the cats later. And then with the ADHD component too, it's just like, hey, I really can't handle a lot of information at once. Like I really need to break things down. And if you're just telling me 10 things I need to do later, it's not going to get done.
Yeah.
I'm probably going to have a panic attack about it. And so it's like an uncomfortable position to always have to explain yourself to people. But I would say that working with a therapist, working with a doctor, saying like, what accommodations are going to help me be able to do my job better, and then being able to explain that to someone. Like in an ideal world, my leadership would be able to, like there wouldn't be that weird boundary of like crossing, like talking to somebody about something that they don't legally need to talk about, like what you're
Right.
saying. Like you don't have to disclose your disabilities, but feeling comfortable too, like does make life a little bit easier. Hopefully you all follow that train of thought. I'm
Yeah, the
sorry.
first boss that I actually said, hey, I have depression and I need to take some time, his response was, you need to talk to HR, I can't speak to you anymore, which is not a good response.
But that happens.
Yeah,
that's-
and so something I haven't plugged yet is OSMA, changed the name from OSME, Open Sourcing Mental Health instead of Mental Illness. Organization I volunteer with, like them so much, I got their logo tattooed on my arm. But they put out 3 handbooks on osmhelp.org, OSMH help.org, and the 3 books are for employees, for employers, and for HR professionals. And it kind of outlines, and it's all vetted by lawyers, ADA experts. It's not just a few developers in a room saying, "Hey, let's put this." It's good information.
What was that site again?
osmhhelp.org. Hi.
Can I make 2 comments?
Please do.
One, to follow up what you were saying. So I used to be JD's manager. I've worked hard on being a manager and a leader, and part of that is learning how to communicate with people. So I agree, it should be the onus on you to be like, can you tell me what the meeting's going to be about when we schedule a meeting? I've learned for communicating as a manager, whether it has nothing to do with your employees having mental health issues or not, it's that I should always put down, like, when the schedule meetings, like, can we talk 5 minutes about your cats? So, right? And so the more you give them, because no matter what, those people have anxiety. So I think if you're not getting that from your leadership, that can be hard to say directly to someone. I understand that, but hopefully, if your business does any sort of review cycle, especially if you can provide, it would be hard to be anonymous, I guess. But like, hey, it would be great if there was additional communication and details, and or demonstrating that yourself. So I would get frustrated with that too, and so I always try to model that. Even before I became a manager, I was like, hey, can we have a meeting for this? And then my second point was about something else. Oh, yes. What you said about blocking out time.
Mm-hmm.
I 100% agree with that. I think it's perfectly, like, I always on my calendar, I block off my lunch period on my calendar, because especially since everyone's gone to remote working, no one respects the lunch period. So I'm just like, I have lunch every day on my calendar, and I leave my office and I go downstairs and I make lunch and I sit on my porch, and the weather's nice, and I eat my lunch, and then I go back when it's time to go back to lunch. So I think that's just beneficial for everybody.
Yeah.
To learn those boundaries, especially in the world we're in now, where it's so easy just to sit at your desk and be stuck in workload for extra long time because you don't have those natural breaks of like leaving the office to get lunch or whatnot.
What I found helps me a lot with that, especially, is wake up, walk around the block to simulate going to work, and just having that little simulated break from between home and work helps out a lot. And just to say what I think about Mike as a manager, after he left the company we used to work at, the person who took over decided that all of the developers should form teams and have names for the teams, and my suggestion was Mike Miles Fan Club. Yeah, the others didn't want to take that, but because they thought that it might be a little offensive to your successor. I didn't really give 2 shits about that, but yeah, so he knows what he's doing.
He makes a good point too that like these things we're talking about in terms of accessibility help everybody, not just folks that have mental illness. It helps everybody to have clear communication. It helps everybody to be able to like articulate what your needs are, and so sometimes it's just a matter of like explaining to people what you need from them. Like I'm a partner manager, but my role is somewhat in sales at Pantheon, and I've become like a better communicator with my friends and with my partner because I'm just like, I'm not making as many assumptions. I'm at work, I'm trying to ask as many questions to understand what somebody really needs, and so then just trying to explain like, okay, hey, when you say that to me, like what are you trying to ask me? Like what is the like thesis statement here? Or like yeah, I don't know. So this is good.
I know in your accessibility one yesterday, Donna mentioned normalize asking everybody what they need as opposed to just the people who need it. Yeah, and it really hit her because I realized I've gradually over the past 2 years from working remotely, as I've been sending emails to people, I think so I also send out emails and try to put everything in the email and asking for meetings because it was selfish for me at first, but it was because it helped reduce the back and forth so many times. Like it was initially, if I just include everything all at once, I can reduce all the other emails coming in as a response, but what about this, what about this? But then I realized it was also like, I also appreciate getting emails from people that include that information information to me, so I know what to expect and what to be prepared for. Yeah.
I think it's also really important, especially if you're in a larger organization, there's often internal resource groups. If you're in a smaller one, you know, there's not one already on Drupal, maybe we could create one. But ask people what they do that works for them. Because sometimes you'll hear that the company has something that they can offer you that you never occurred to you to ask for. And it's like, oh, that's pretty cool. Like, there's a way to automatically make Google Calendar put buffers in? Okay, let's all start doing this and things like that. So, you know, suddenly the bio break is scheduled, you know, we all need those. I'm so glad that's recorded. Damn it, again.
All right. I'm gonna stop recording unless anybody has anything they real want to say to Kevin or